Recently after Mass, someone came out and said, "Father, I really enjoyed your homily today." And they said, "You're a very warm preacher." And I thought, that was very nice of them to say. I hadn't really thought much about it. And I said, maybe I did give a good homily and was feeling pretty good about it after that. So at dinner that night at the rectory, I was telling my confreres, my peers, I said, someone complimented me today after my homily on the way outside of Mass. And they said, Father Stephen, you're a very warm preacher. To which Father Josh said, well, before you get too cocky or confident about your preaching abilities, you might want to remember the definition of warm is not so hot. So needless to say, sometimes it takes our peers, sometimes it takes peers or family to kind of put us in our place, to kind of put us in the place that maybe, make us a little bit more humble. That's part of what their job or their role really is. So we're always grateful for that. And it happened in the gospel today that the peers of James and John, Jesus himself, they really were put into their place because they were feeling kind of cocky, kind of confident. They went up to Jesus and they said to him, Jesus, we need a favor. Hey, can you do something for us? And really it's kind of how a 10-year-old might ask a question of their parents in order to manipulate their parents. Jesus has a very good response, though. He doesn't say yes or no. Jesus says, well, what exactly do you want me to do? And it's pretty interesting because here's these two men who by this point have witnessed Jesus calm the storm, heal the paralytic, bring great peace to people, express the gift of great love. He's done all kinds of miracles and wonderful, beautiful emotions. What did they ask for? But really kind of nervy of them. They said, well, when you're in your glory, we want to be on your right and your left. We want places of honor. I think it screams of entitlement. It screams of, we deserve to be in those places of honor. And Jesus said, well, that's not really mine to give. And besides the fact, there's going to be a lot of suffering to come before that even happens. It tells us that they probably weren't listening to Jesus right before he spoke these words and before they asked the question of what they wanted. Really, it tells us that they weren't listening because Jesus had just given his third prediction of his passion, of his suffering, and of his death. They didn't want to hear any of that. All they wanted to hear about was, you're going to rise again in glory. And we want to be there, but we don't want to have to deal with the nitty-gritty and the suffering, the sacrifice, perhaps even of our own lives, that's going to happen between now and then. And so Jesus really had to deal with them in a way of bringing them to humility, making them a little bit more humble. Henry Nouwen put it very beautifully in his book, ironically entitled, Can You Drink the Cup? He's a spiritual writer, very beautiful, easy to read, Henry Nouwen. He wrote and he said, when we are crushed like grapes, it is hard to think of the wine we will become. When we are crushed like grapes, it is difficult to think of the wine we will become. And that's very much here when we are humbled in a particular time or in a particular place. We never know what fruit it might bear. So Jesus had to prepare his apostles, all of the disciples, for what the suffering that was to come. And humility and being humbled, it's not the worst thing. Because really that's how we achieve the gift of glory. That is how we achieve eternal life, is maybe through suffering and pain. There's something called redemptive suffering. That when we face the pains, either physically, emotionally, or spiritually, When something doesn't go our way, and we realize that truly the words we speak in the Our Father, thy will be done, really might be the reality of what we're living, not our will, well, we can take some comfort in knowing that God's plan and God's will is being accomplished, maybe leading us to a place of greater glory. And how is it that we ourselves can sacrifice in our lives and maybe give of ourselves with a servant type of mentality? A modern-day saint who did this in a most extraordinary way was Saint Maximilian Kolbe. He was canonized in 1982. He was a priest. He was a prisoner at Auschwitz. Few prisoners had escaped, and the cruelty of the human person and the evil that took place at that time was really extraordinary in that 3 people escaped, so they took 10 men, they put them into a prison cell, and they starved them to death. It's awful. I mean, this was only 60, 70 years ago. These aren't things that happened, centuries ago. And one of the men cried out as he was being taken in, "My wife, my children, what about them?" And St. Maximilian Kolbe, again, a humble priest, was sort of off to the side. And he said, "I'll take that man's place. Let him go to be with his wife and children. I will be there and take that place in that 10. And so as a result, for him, he gave his life in ransom for another. And along with that, he gives us a good example of humility. A good example of saying, well, maybe it's not my will or my way, but I'm going to truly live my life for God. Maybe God today is going to invite us into giving our lives for someone else, to maybe take a road of serving another instead of being served. Maybe today we're being called to act a little bit more humbly in our way that we go about our business, maybe even in our family. Maybe it's not all about us, all about me, but we have to think of the many people that surround us. And really, in the lesson today in the gospel is the road to glory, which really can be the higher road, will only be achieved if we've sweat a little bit on the lower road to the destination. How is God going to present something to us here and now that might allow us to sit on his right or his left? Maybe it's not something we want to think about today, or our goal is not to sit at his right or left. Maybe we just need to make it through whatever he puts before us. But if we can always have our sights on the end, the suffering that takes place now will be even sweeter when we receive the crown of eternal and everlasting life.